This video will be discussing the traditionalist and reactionary themes in Akelebeth, the fourth part of JRR Tolkien's the Silmarillion. This is roughly a 30-page segment of the book which details the downfall of the great kingdom of men, Numenor. So if you're a Tolkien fan but consider yourself apolitical, this video mightn't be for you. Oswald Spengler was a German philosopher famed for writing his magnum opus, The Decline of the West, where he believed that the West had already passed through the creative stage of culture into that of reflection and material comfort, and that the future could only be a period of irreversible decline. Nor was there any prospect of reversing the process, for civilizations blossomed and decayed like natural organisms, and true rejuvenation was impossible. Akelebeth follows the men who fought alongside the Elves and the Valar in the War of Wrath, the great war of the First Age to defeat Morgoth, the first Dark Lord. As a result of the great deeds and loyalty, these men were given a new home, free from the evil and sadness of Middle-earth. This was called Numenor, an island located in the ocean between the western shores of Middle-earth and the eastern shores of Aman, where the Valar dwelt. Numenorians were blessed with long life, the first king being Elros, brother of Elrond, sons of Arundil and descendants of Beren and Luthien. As they entered Numenor, the Numenorians were forbidden to set sail towards Aman, the land in the west, which they gladly accepted and agreed to because they regarded the mortality as a gift and did not envy the Valar and Elves, who could not die. And for 1,500 years, Numenor grew in might. With the help of their elven friends, they established an advanced culture and civilization. An important aspect of Numenorian culture is that it is in part derived from elven culture as well as the race of men. Elros and Elrond, who are both half elf and half men, were given the opportunity to choose their race, and Elros, unlike his brother, declared for the race of men. This soon-to-be great kingdom of men had a strong foundational myth to give life to their society, which was that of the alliance between the good men of Middle-earth and the Elves to defeat Morgoth and effectively save Middle-earth from great evil. The Numenorians would build a great, mighty seafaring civilization. Their lore and craft were advanced and enriched by the knowledge of the Eldar, or the Elves, and their body and mind grew in stature, standing on average a height of 6'4", far taller than the men of the East. They excelled in shipbuilding and seacraft and became skilled mariners. The Numenorians began to cultivate new friends, teaching the men in the East about agriculture, stonemasonry, and smithing. The Numenorians never dwelt long on the shores of Middle-earth, but the men who populated the western shores were comforted. They revered the memory of the tall sea kings, who they remembered as gods, hoping each time for their return. The Numenorians, or Dunedain, would also establish settlements in Middle-earth, warding off Sauron's expansion into the region. Sauron greatly feared the Dunedain, a fear he would always hold on to, even during the events of The Lord of the Rings. Numenorian culture was synonymous with their excellent relationship with the Elves, being close allies with the kingdom of the Noldor Gil-galad, and through the receiving of notable gifts such as the seedling of Celeborn, the white tree of Tol Eressë, which grew at the court of kings, and was named Nimloth. Out of respect for their culture and linked to the Eldar, the kings of Numenor would take elven names when they ascended to the throne. This culture would eventually become subverted and desecrated from within, however. Societal collapse is the fall of complex human society, characterized by the loss of cultural identity, of socio-economic complexity, the downfall of government, and the rise of decadence and violence within society. The kings of Numenor would traditionally accept death willingly and pass on while their heir was still relatively young, allowing them to rule during their strongest years. However, eventually fear of death and denial of their nature would set in, and the kings began clinging on to life until their bodies became fragile while their heirs grew old and out of their prime years. This fear of death would turn to jealousy of the Elves and their immortality. This would seem to have had a knock-on effect of the men actually shortening their lives and turning them cruel. The Numenorians became divided into two parties, the faithful or the Elendil, and the king's men. Those that followed the king abandoned the use of the Eldarin tongue and were estranged from the Eldar and Valar, while the faithful were still friends with the Eldar. When King Ar-Adunakor ascended to the throne, he was the first king to choose an Ardunic name and began to persecute the faithful, punishing all those who would speak elven tongues openly, and in the end the Eldar no longer came to the land of Numenor. In his book The Decline of the West, Oswald Spengler discusses how each culture has an initial religious identity. Religions follow a trajectory that correlates with the trajectory of the culture. The religion eventually results in a Reformation-like period after the cultural ideal has reached its peak and fulfillment. Spengler views a Reformation as representative of a declining factory. The Reformation is followed by a period of rationalism and a sort of unwielding devotion to scientism and loss of mysticism. This theory is demonstrated in the Silmarillion through the men of Numenor initially following the religion of the Valar and reaching a peak in their society's development before undergoing a reformational period in which Sauron subverts the religion of the Valar, replacing it with worship of Morgoth. Notably, Sauron and Morgoth would also seem to represent Tolkien's disdain for scientific materialism, nihilism and industrialization. Sauron would become captured by King Ar-Pharazôn and brought back as a prisoner to Numenor. However, Sauron would use his intellect and influence to subvert everything that made Numenor a prosperous civilization. He would use lies and deception to drive a wedge between the men of the West and the Eldar, feeding into the growing insecurity of the Dunedain and their fear of death. Sauron would convince the population that the first Dark Lord, Morgoth, could have granted them immortality, while the Valar in Aman were keeping this gift from them. Through numerous lies, he would poison the mind of the king and become master of his council, changing even the religion of the Númenóreans and turning them into servants of the Dark Lord Morgoth. The Númenóreans now began preparations for war with the Valar, and a great fleet assembled by the armies of the Númenor would set sail to challenge the Valar in defiance of the laws of Ilúvatar, that no man may set foot in Aman. This would result in the near complete destruction of the population of Númenor. The island itself was razed to the ground and collapsed into the sea by Ilúvatar as punishment for the decadence of the men of the West. According to Spengler, all cultures come to what he calls a civilizational phase, an autumn when this breaks down. Megacities are characteristics of this time. Leadership is motivated by selfishness and money, and a move through imperialism, similar to how the Dunedain would establish rule of the men of Middle-earth. Science no longer reaches certainties. People no longer accept common principles or goals. They fight all rules from the past, desecrating the foundational myths of society. The arts, rather than working in ways that seem obvious to artists and people, follow fashions with constant changes of style. Later in this culture, after a period of atheism, people turn to religious renewal based on the religion developed in the spring of the culture, which can be seen through the actions of the Elendil, in what was a ray of hope for the men of Numenor and perhaps their own Western civilization. The culture and memory of Numenor was preserved and saved through the actions of the Elendil. These are the men who never strayed from the foundational myth of Numenor, nor betrayed the Valar. Pockets of Numenor's people, its ideas and cultures, were saved and preserved through Elendil and his sons, Isildur and Anarion. They escaped the Akallabeth with 9 ships, a seedling of Nimloth, the white tree and symbol of their civilization, which Isildur rescued the night before its destruction, as well as the 7 seeing stones, or the Palantiri. Cast ashore by the storm which destroyed Numenor onto the western lands of Middle-earth, they founded the great Númenórean realms in exile, Arnor and Gondor, and despite the widespread destruction of its people, the great line of men would endure.